On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, is the Jones Act waiver working? I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So the Trump administration has announced an extension to the Jones Act. What do we mean? Well, the White House is giving a 90-day extension to a previous extension that was set to expire on May 17th. This waiver will allow for the easier movement of oil, fuel, and fertilizer around the United States. Specifically, this enables foreign flag vessels to move commodities between American ports through mid-August. Now, we have talked about the Jones Act on this channel just a few times. What's that? 34 separate videos. Seems like a lot. Well, we have talked about the Jones Act a lot. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I talk about the Jones Act quite a bit here because, number one, I think that most people who talk about the Jones Act don't know what the Jones they're talking about. So I do spend some time doing it. Yes, and Peter Zeihan has been the focus of some of that, but there have been other people too. We're going to break this down to you. I'm going to give you my best unbiased view, but there's always a bias. Let's be clear about that. In what is happening right now regarding this and what waivers have actually been extended. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, I guess the first thing to do is really define what the Jones Act is. Now, I am a little bit of a nitpicker on this one, and I will not deny it, but I think I'm kind of right on this. The Jones Act is the entire act that was passed back in 1920, the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. I've written about this. I've talked about it. If you want a background video, I got one up here for you to go take a look at. I've talked about this. This was a national maritime strategy that was passed in the wake of World War I. And one of the components of it, Section 27, which kind of implies that there are other sections of this act, dealt with the issue of cabotage. And cabotage is what the focus is. This is the movement of goods between U.S. ports. 46 U.S. Code 55102. This basically spells out the requirements, and this is what is being waived right now. Now, there is a way to waive this. Specifically, 46 U.S. Code 501, on the request of the Secretary of Defense, the head of an agency responsible for the administration of the navigation or vessel inspection laws, shall waive compliance with those laws to the extent the Secretary considers necessary in the interest of national defense to address an immediate adverse effect on military operations. So what we're getting here is that the Secretary of Defense / War, Pete Hegseth, has determined that there is a critical issue requiring the waiving of the Jones Act because of the operations that are happening in the Persian Gulf, which I have to say is kind of funny because every time I hear Pete Hegseth talk about the Persian Gulf and the closure of the Persian Gulf, he says that it doesn't impact the United States. So if it doesn't impact the United States, Pete, why the frick are you waiving the Jones Act if it has no impact? So the nut and bolt of the Jones Act, Section 27 cabotage, is this. If you want to move a U.S. cargo from a U.S. port to another U.S. port, you have to do it, and your ship has to meet 4 criteria. Number 1, you have to be U.S. owned. You have to be U.S. built. You have to be U.S. flagged, and you have to be U.S. crewed. Now, there are foreign ships that move between American ports all the time. Many container ships will stop at 2, 3, 4 ports and load, unload cargo. But what they're not doing is picking up cargo in an American port and dropping it off in another. The key issue here is foreign ships. Now, the only difference between foreign ships and American ships in terms of cost is 2 factors. One is the cost you pay the crew. American mariners make substantially more than foreign mariners. Foreign mariners largely come from 6 places: the Philippines, China, India, Indonesia, Ukraine, and Russia, and the standard of living there is much lower, so they do not get comparable U.S. wages. The other aspect is you can be foreign built. To operate within the cabotage trade, you have to be American built, and American ships are much more expensive. Now, some people will blame the Jones Act for the dire nature of the U.S. shipping. I disagree entirely with that. There are numerous others. I have 10 of them right here if you want to watch it, that led to the decline of the U.S. Merchant Marine, and none of them are the Jones Act. Matter of fact, cabotage in the Jones Act is what's keeping, in some measures, the U.S. fleet still in existence. Without it, you would not have any coastal fleet left. You would be basically unemploying everybody in deadly catch, because the deadliest catch crew would be replaced by Russian sailors or Chinese sailors and Chinese vessels. That's what would happen immediately. Now, response to this was quick. This story by Mike Scholler over at G Captain. Now, in the article, he talks about new analysis from industry economists and tanker operators suggest the policy could have little impact on consumer fuel prices, and it might even increase shipping costs under certain market conditions. 7 American maritime labor organizations also weighed in Thursday, sending a letter to the White House. In that letter, they said waiving the Jones Act would do nothing to reduce gasoline prices. The primary driver of gasoline prices is the cost of crude oil, not domestic shipping costs. Several studies have shown the impact of domestic shipping on nationwide fuel prices is negligible, and any marginal savings would be unlikely to reach the consumer. Okay, so the waiver has been in place since March 17th, and now an extension is going to push it out into mid-August. So I explained to you what is the Jones Act, how it operates, but let's look at the physicality of the Jones Act, specifically the ships. Because I think sometimes what we don't understand is what these ships specifically do in regards to the transportation of goods. Now, the U.S. Maritime Administration has gotten much better recently. I give a lot of attribute here to the departing Deputy Administrator Sang Yi, who really got MARAD up and running on updating their website and getting data out. This is the most recent data we have on ships in the U.S. Merchant Marine as of January 5th, 2026, specifically ships over 1,000 gross tons engaged in the movement of cargo from port to port. Of those 190 ships, 93 of them are Jones Act eligible. 56 of them are tankers, and they represent 3,868,246 deadweight tons. So let's go over to marine traffic now. These are the 56 Jones Act tankers. Now, what I did is I ran this from the time of the waiver, March 17th, all the way to May 1st, today, with their tracks. And this shows you all 56 vessels and where they're at. I'm going to break down just a few of them here for you in a moment. Couple of things to note. Some of the ships are not engaged in coastal trade. Some of them are actually crossing the Pacific right now, and a lot of them are crossing the Pacific either under a contract to deliver fuel. So, for example, Sunshine State here is delivering fuel over to Subic Bay. The Polar Enterprise, which is a large crude carrier, is actually heading across to Korea to go into a shipyard. Because of her size, she has to go to an overseas shipyard to be repaired. Same thing for Washington. But if you look at the Jones Act trade, there are 3 areas in which the Jones Act trade kind of operates when it comes to tankers. The first area right here is on the West Coast. And the West Coast operation is quite extensive. You'll see it operates between Alaska, where you're getting crude oil out of Valdez right here, and then it runs down to places like Washington, in and around Seattle, in and around San Francisco Bay, and down to the San Pedro area, LA, and Long Beach. Now, there's also voyages periodically out to Hawaii to deliver cargo, but you can see the tracks here just from March 17th to May 1st. Where ships are operating. So there's basically a closed little network here that operates on the West Coast, delivering crude oil to refineries and then distributing refined fuel up and down the coast. And then we have the Gulf Coast here. And the Gulf Coast is a little bit unique too, because you see ships coming out of Corpus Christi, coming out of Houston, coming out of Beaumont, coming out of New Orleans, and they're delivering cargo to a variety of places, to Mobile, to Florida. Florida is really unique because you're delivering fuel down here to Tampa, to Port Everglades, up to Jacksonville. Florida is not on the pipeline system. So a lot of fuel is delivered internally within the United States by pipeline. So to get Florida, for example, you need a lot of tankers. And then you have tankers that come up the East Coast to a couple of places. So you'll deliver refined product to Savannah, to Charleston. But the big place you come up to is up here on the Delaware River in Philadelphia, where you deliver crude oil. That crude oil is going in there to be refined into clean products. And then the other spot you have here is kind of two. One, you have an offshoot ship here, the American Energy, which is actually a foreign-built ship that's in the Jones Act trade under a provision in the Coast Guard Authorization Bill for 1990, I believe it's 1996. They were able to bring in an older ship, an LNG carrier, in to provide LNG shipments from Texas to Puerto Rico. It's a very specific trade, and it's an exemption under the Jones Act. The other element you're seeing here is the movement of fuel. For example, over here you see the overseas Nicosia. There is a movement of refined fuel coming out of the Gulf Coast through the Panama Canal and up to the West Coast, delivering largely gasoline, but also refined fuel kerosene for aviation fuel. So the Jones Act is not perfect in many ways. I have called for reform of the Jones Act. Just looking at these ships up here, for example, at the beginning, on March 17th, 4 of these ships were in shipyards. The Independence was in a shipyard in Mexico. The Louisiana was in a Korean shipyard. Oregon and CK Valor were in shipyards in the Bahamas. And you may ask, under the Jones Act, don't those ships need to be in U.S. yards to get repaired? Yes, they do. However, they can do foreign shipyards, but they have to pay a 50% ad valorem tax. Now, one of the issues that is going on right now with the passage of the Ships Act that's in Congress right now, with the President executive order, with the Maritime Action Plan that has been released, is we're trying to get U.S. shipbuilding up and running again, in particularly repair. There are a finite amount of repair facilities in the United States, and they're almost exclusively packed with U.S. government ships, either ships of the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has dredgers, the Military Sealift Command, the Maritime Administration, so much so that commercial ships go to foreign yards close by or overseas in Korea, for example, because they can get the shipyard work done faster. They can get it done on time. That's the issue. If you go into Denton Shipyard in Charleston, if you go down to Alabama Shipyard in Mobile, if you go up to Vigor up in Portland, Oregon, you may face delays not because of the shipyard, but because of Navy contracts that they're working. And unfortunately, commercial ships take the back seat. Now, I've changed the map here just a little bit, and I've included all 190 U.S. flag ships. The ones in blue are the Jones Act vessels. The ones in yellow are those vessels that are engaged in international trade, and a large number of those are part of what's called the Maritime Security Program. 60 vessels, and 10 of them are part of the Tanker Security Program. And the ships of the Tanker Security Program, the 10 tankers in the Tanker Security Program, 2 of which, by the way, are still trapped in the Persian Gulf, just throw that out there for everything. Some of those ships are under short-term charter to the U.S. government, and other tankers are under long-term charter to the United States government. Quite a few of these tankers are currently involved right now in operations to support U.S. naval forces out in the Indian Ocean. I did a whole video on it. You can see it above there on logistics out there. There are, by my account, almost 10 tankers, either under charter to Military Sealift Command or under short-term charter out of the Tanker Security Program, that are shuttling fuel, supporting operations in and around that region. This is one of the reasons why the Jones Act is so crucial, because we're seeing, for example, a couple of Jones Act tankers being used to deliver fuel to forward bases. So we see Sunshine State heading out to the Philippines. We see the movement of some oil over to Korea for refining. This is really crucial. We have to look at the entire system holistically. So that's the movement. And most importantly, those Jones Act tankers provide long-term coverage in the United States. They book contracts for months, if not years. And that ensures that American tankers aren't being pulled away to go chase after the higher dollar. Yes, they get paid a little more for those long-term contracts. Yes, they're getting paid more because U.S. ships are more expensive to build and U.S. crews are more expensive, but they are servicing the United States. That's a dedicated service that's provided to the United States and of absolute national security interests. All right, Sal. Well, if that's the case, then why do we even need the waivers? Is it necessary to have the waivers? Well, let's talk about the waivers. Number one, let's talk about the mechanism of the waivers. So Customs and Border Protection have been issuing guidance. This is their third updated guidance issued Specifically, it lays out, for example, if you want to conduct transportation of commodities listed in an attachment on a foreign flag vessel, you have to contact CBP and include if information, the vessel name, the commodity, the what's called the harmonized tariff schedule code, the carrier, the ports and dates of departures and arrivals, and a copy of what's called CB Form 1302. Now, no later than 10 days after the conclusion of the voyage, the owner-operator shall submit to the Maritime Administrator a report including the following, and it lists all the information there so that we can have a record of it. This is the Maritime Administration section on domestic shipping. Specifically, it deals with the Jones Act and the waiver of navigation laws. Now, notice here that in past, the Maritime Administrator has made non-availability determinations. The most recent was back in 2022. They have not posted the non-availability determinations for these waivers yet. I am waiting to see that. They have, however, posted waiver reports. Now, this is a subject of immense importance. I mean, this is the most significant series of waivers in terms of the Jones Act that have ever been issued, which really makes me question a few things here. Number one, the Maritime Administrator, Stephen Carmel, recently appointed to that role, just gave testimony before Congress. Specifically, he gave a report before the Committee on Armed Services, Subcommittee on Sea Power and Projection Forces, and the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation. The hearing was on revitalizing ship base and the maritime industrial base. And in his opening statements and throughout the hearing, there is almost no mention, there's no mention at all in his opening statements about the Jones Act or the waivers, which I find very interesting because I would think this would be a subject of immense importance because it does seem to jeopardize the stated intent of the Trump administration, which is to revitalize and rebuild the U.S. Merchant Marine. Now, I'm not saying you should not waive the Jones Act in certain cases. I mean, there are times when there's going to be a need to do that. Now, if you want a little bit more detailed analysis of this, I am going to give you both sides of the equation here. Again, I try to be as unbiased as I can. Number one, Holland and Knight has this out there, Jones Act waiver issued in response to Iran conflict, legal analysis and implications. Now, there are criticisms, as I noted to you before. You had the shipping unions. This story by Mike Schuller, Jones Act waiver leaves key questions unanswered. What laws apply to foreign ships in U.S. trade? While you waive the Jones Act and you remove the restriction for that, there are other issues that are at play. Specifically, K&L Gates looked at the issue of foreign vessels operating under the Jones Act waiver and what should be considered, whether U.S. laws may apply. In particular, they're looking at labor laws, among other issues. So this is a very dicey issue because now you have foreign crews, foreign nationals getting paid below, in some cases, minimum wage operating within the United States. Now, again, we have foreign ships in and out of U.S. ports all the time. But as we're going to talk about here, there's a couple of examples where the ships don't leave U.S. territorial waters at all. So over at oilprice.com, this story back on April 15th, Trump's waiver of Jones Act fails to cool oil prices. This cites a study from Wichita State University that is looking at the impact that the Jones Act waiver is having specifically on oil and gas. The American Maritime Partnership has a website out there that is looking at the increasing cost of gas and what the projected Jones Act waiver savings are. You'll notice there it's less than a penny per gallon. And one of the things they're looking at is, has the waiver helped with potential shortages? They say that the alleged fuel transportation by waiver shipments is 9 million barrels. By the way, I don't see that in the data so far. We're nowhere near 9 million barrels. But you'll notice here where the waiver was announced back here on March 15th, gas was at $3.72 a gallon. And right now it's sitting at $4.12 and 0.3 of a cent gallon. Now, on the flip side of this, I will give you those who are in favor of this. This is from the Cato Institute. Colin Grabo wrote this back on March 18th, and specifically he identifies 3 issues regarding the waiver. First, the waiver will provide needed economic relief. Second, the administration's action further confirms that the Jones Act is a supply chain impediment. That said, the waiver is not beyond question. And again, I'll have links to all those so you can take a look at them. I try to provide the information for you so that you can make your own assessment. All right. So why is the Jones Act waiver in place? Talked about the fact that the Secretary of War asked for it. I don't think it was the Secretary of War. I actually think it was Kevin Hassett and Stephen Miller who were behind this waiver. And the reason I think Kevin Hassett was involved is back in 2022, he wrote this op-ed piece, Waive the Jones Act to get supply chain flowing again. So Hassett has always had it in for the Jones Act. And there was an interesting interview he gave just yesterday about jet fuel on the West Coast.
The war with Iran now almost 60 days old. Going forward, how would you predict or assess the impact on jet fuel prices right now? I know it's a big concern.
Jet fuel prices, were an especially big concern at the beginning because the jet fuel on the West Coast was coming in from Asia, and Asia is one of the places most affected. So we actually had, say, Korean refineries sending jet fuel to our West Coast refiners. And as an example, how President Trump has taken every step to make sure that the impact of these higher prices and potential supply disruptions are minimized in the U.S. And so we waived the Jones Act, we got the jet fuel into the West Coast of the U.S. And again, our expectation is that everything's going to increase, the supply will increase rapidly once the straits are open, and we're extremely hopeful.
And that Jones Act waiver, I know, extended for another 90 days. How does that, for people who may not be familiar with that, how does that impact everyday consumers?
Well, we 100% support American shipping. We think it's really, really important that we have shipyards in the U.S. and we want them to be healthier than they've ever been. But in order to get the fuel from the Gulf to the West Coast, we had to waive the Jones Act. And we found that was incredibly effective. We think there were about 8 million barrels of refined product that went to the West Coast to help reduce the price risks over there and make sure that there was jet fuel for the airports. And so that's why it was extended for 90 days, but because we had so much success with the program.
Excuse me. Sorry. Strange that hit all of a sudden there, right there. Okay. Hang on, Hassett. I'm going to call you to task on this one quite a bit. Number one, 8 million barrels of jet fuel to the West Coast. There has not been 8 million barrels of any friggin' thing moved by waiver so far. I tallied up your little spreadsheet there. What I come up with is 1.347 million barrels to the West Coast, and it ain't jet fuel. If you look at this list, there is not 8 million barrels of anything on this list. And by the way, as you look at this, somebody show me where it says kerosene or jet fuel on here. I see gasoline, I see crude oil, I see gasoline blend, I see very low sulfur fuel oil. I don't see anything in here that talks about it. Hassett, I don't think that is accurate in what you're saying at all. Second, the issue with the shortage on the West Coast, let's deal with that for a second. So this is the Energy Information Administration's update on not U.S. West Coast, but U.S. Gulf Coast kerosene-type jet fuel spot prices. The reason we're seeing the spot price jump so much is because of the pull on demand out of the United States for jet fuel. Jet fuel was sitting back in January at about a little over $2 a gallon. And then it spikes up to over $4 a gallon in April. It's down a bit now. We're at basically $4.02 a gallon on April 27th. But this is the Gulf Coast. This is the heart of American, production and manufacturing. And it's spiking there because the demand is global, not just on the West Coast. Second, this has been going on for a long time. This is a report from March of 2025 talking about refinery closures and rising consumption will reduce U.S. petroleum inventories in 2026. And what we're seeing is those shortages. We were already talking about shortages before we had what happened in the Persian Gulf. And then I did a video back in February talking about the fact that California was running out of gas. And the reason California was running out of gas is because they shut down 10% of their refinery capacity just in this past year. So California really, the West Coast issue was in the making long before the Persian Gulf happened. So again, yeah, we have this waiver being issued, but California was already in this issue. And understand what Hassett's trying to do is control the price of gasoline and diesel in the United States. They're already up over $1 a gallon for gasoline and well over that for diesel fuel. I mean, we're over $4 nationally for gasoline. So Hassett doesn't really have a lot of control over that. All right, let's take a look at some of these waivers specifically, because some of these waivers, I'm not going to lie, they make me have a lot of questions. So this is the April 30th MARAD report. There's a grand total here of 23 vessels, 23 waivers that have been issued. There's some repeats. There's one vessel that did 3 waivers. There's another vessel that did, there are 2 other vessels that did 2 waivers apiece. And they note the flags here. Interesting to note that the registries here, no China registry on here at all. The registries tend to be fairly traditional ones right now. Marshall Islands, Liberia is on here, Malta. We have a couple other ones here, Panama, Denmark, Singapore on there. I have not taken the time to break down ownerships or crews on these vessels yet. So a couple of things that I noted here were load dates. So this waiver was as of March 17th, but here are some load dates that are before this. This one was January 30th. This one was February 27th. This one was March 2nd. So one of the vessels I want to focus on is this one right here, the motor vessel Cabo Deseado, Cape Management Incorporated, Fleet Sheet Management, PTE. This is actually an American-owned company, Secor, that operates this vessel. 3 separate waivers for this ship. The first one, again, March 2nd, going from Martinez, California, the PBF refining company, down to Marathon in Long Beach, PBF Energy Southwest, LA and Long Beach. When you look at the details here, nearly 300,000 barrels specifically of gas oil. Now the ship does it again, April 12th, loads in Martinez, heads back down to the PBF terminal, this time in LA, bringing low sulfur gas oil, 250,000 barrels. And then on April 18th, it loads at the PBF terminal. So the terminal it offloads, it actually loads, and it's bringing a load of heavy crude oil, about 250,000 barrels, up to Martinez. So if you want to understand the waiver and how it works, and a perfect example of this, I give you Cabo Deseado. So Cabo Deseado is a 300,000 ton tanker. She offloaded in China, came across the Pacific, and came down here to Los Angeles. So we talked about those 3 voyages she took. Well, here she is inbound into Los Angeles, and she's showing to be in ballast. Now, on the way out, she's partially laden. So she took a load, not a complete load, but a partial load. And then she comes up and sits off the coast of California. So early in March, she's sitting here off the coast of California, just cutting holes in the water, which makes you wonder, why would you be cutting holes in the water, Sal? Well, because they're waiting for the waiver to be passed. And once the waiver is passed, she heads up into Martinez and loads her cargo. So she's going to load her cargo. She's going to come back out here, wait to get approval, and now she is actually coming back into LA and Long Beach to drop it off for delivery, because now the ship is going to be used as kind of a shuttle tanker for 2 more waivers between Martinez and Southern California. Again, this is for the advantage of really the oil company much more than it is for the citizens of California. So the next one I want to show you here is the motor vessel Pheasant. And this one caught my eye almost immediately. There's another one like this and a lot more that seem to be happening. So Pheasant, Singapore flagged. She loads in Galveston, Texas at TIT, the Texas International Terminal, on April 7th. She then offloads on April 18th at the LBC terminal in Houston, Texas. And what she is carrying is 134,970.71 barrels of undenaturated ethanol. Now, if you were like me, you're probably wondering, Sal, what the hell is undenaturated ethanol? Because I had no clue. Well, unadulterated ethanol is pure ethanol or absolute ethanol, a highly pure form of alcohol containing a minimal amount of water. I'm not going to go into details. It is a key component in the pharmaceutical and cosmetic industries. It serves as a solvent for various drugs and is employed in the manufacturing of medicines, tinctures, and personal care products. It's also used in alcohol too, and I mean drinking alcohol. That's what we're talking about. So we're talking about moving 135,000 barrels of, let's call it moonshine, between Galveston, Texas, and Houston, Texas. Now, when you look at the chart here, you get the issue about why I think this is a problem. So here is the Pheasant at anchor off of Galveston, Texas. Now, this is 7 April. Now, she is going to sail into Galveston, Texas here, and she is going to come up against the berth here at the port of Galveston, and right here is the facility that we talked about. Then she actually heads out to sea and just kind of cuts holes in the ocean here. And then in the 12th of April, she heads up into Houston. This is 30 miles, 40 miles tops from Galveston to Houston. And it took a week to deliver this. I do have some questions about how this is in the confines of the waiver here. Because number one, you're telling me we don't have tugs and barges that can move this in here. You're telling me that in the port of Houston, friggin' Texas, there are not U.S. flagged tugs and barges that can move this cargo from Galveston to Houston. Obviously, the company was worried about this because when you read the waiver, they went to extreme concern about it. Valero has been in contact with the White House and CBP and have been assured that shipments similar to the one it is seeking to undertake, shipping ethanol for gasoline blending between hubs in Texas, is squarely within the intent of the waiver. I am pretty sure what Valero is doing here is getting more gasoline blended so that they can ship it out to other places, to the West Coast, on another waiver ship probably going out, or to have gasoline that can be shipped out overseas to other places to do it. I am not sure if this is really meeting the confines. And just to note, they have multiple other ones of these that are going on. We've seen this. If you look at the list put out by the Maritime Administration, the newest tankers built by the United States were in 2017. The oldest ones go all the way back to 1981. And if you do the average of that, that puts tankers at about 18 years of age. The average age is right around 2008. We're getting to the point where we need to start thinking about a vessel replacement program. And to me, this is what the U.S. government should be jumping on. We've talked about getting shipbuilding going back in the United States. We've talked about the Maritime Action Plan. We've got this executive order. We got the Ships Act. Let's start building tankers in the United States, medium range and larger crude carrying tankers out there. That's exactly what we need. The U.S. government should begin this. We should do a build and charter program where we build these ships and can lease them to commercial firms. This is one of the big costs associated with building ships in the United States. It's so expensive to build ships. The U.S. government can do this through the Maritime Administration. We've done this in the past where we've done build and charter programs. And at the back end of the contract, 20 years on, the U.S. government buys the ships. We can buy their old ships and put them into a ready reserve fleet where they're sitting there in a reserve status, could be activated if needed to supplement tankers out there, either in the coastal trade or out there internationally where we have ships needed out in the Indian Ocean. This takes care of two things at the same time. We can keep a reserve of crude oil tankers and clean product tankers in the fleet. It allows shipping companies to put the ships back into reserve if they don't need them, almost like a leasing arrangement, and they can pull them out as demand comes up. Should you need to waive the Jones Act in the future, you have a reserve fleet of ships you can tap into, you can crew them, you can man them, you can bring them out. But more importantly, we start building ships in the United States, tankers, something we have built in the past, recent past, and still building at NASCO in San Diego with the United States Navy for their oilers. We can be building commercial tankers. We can start doing that. We can ramp it up. We can be building those at GD and NASCO in San Diego. We can be doing it in Philly Shipyard up in Philadelphia. We could be doing it along the Gulf Coast. There are plenty of elements that we can do to start building tankers again. I think what the Jones Act waivers tell us right now is not that we need to waive the Jones Act or get rid of the Jones Act, but that we need to do it. There's an interesting waiver that's in there, and that is a haul of fuel from the United States Gulf Coast to Puerto Rico. I have talked about this in the past. I do think we need to re-examine some issues about waiving the Jones Act for specific trades, liquefied natural gas, for example, where American energy was brought in. I think we should be waiving that. It's going to take too long to build liquefied natural gas carriers in the United States. Let's focus on something we're building now, tankers for the U.S. Navy. We've built commercial tankers in the recent past. Let's do that. Let's go ahead and start building them now, especially for the coastal trade. Within the confines of the U.S. coastal trade, certain laws don't apply, especially with the International Maritime Organization. We could also start talking about maybe some interesting propulsion for those tankers. Nuclear power, not nuclear power like we have in submarines or aircraft carriers, but commercial nuclear power, molten salt reactors, modular reactors. These are things we should be discussing. So I think we need to be leaning into this issue, examining it, and understanding. I think when Kevin Hassett says that 9 million barrels of jet fuel have been moved, that ain't true. I don't know where he's pulling that number from, but there's no indication that is happening. I think we need to look at the data and understand that what is moving fuel around the United States almost exclusively is pipelines and trucks. That's what moves most fuel around the United States. Ships provide that gap coverage where it doesn't exist. On the West Coast, on the Gulf Coast to Florida and the East Coast of the United States, and then between the Gulf Coast and the West Coast through the Panama Canal. We need to supplement that Gulf Coast to West Coast right now. That should be an area we're looking at right now. Hey, if you want to bring ships in and do it for a longer term waiver, bring them into the U.S. Let's do a Jones Act waiver where we waive the build requirement, but we change those ships out. We reflag them in the United States. We get a provision from the Coast Guard allows that ship to come in temporarily without all the things the Coast Guard require to do this, which is a long and encumbering issue. And more importantly, we get ships that it can be crewed by U.S. merchant mariners. But more importantly, we also need to be working on shipbuilding and ship repair in the United States. The fact that so many of our ships are going overseas to get repaired is a big issue. That indicates to me that this is a systemic problem we need to be addressing. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit the super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. Until our next episode, the Sal, sign off.